and international experts of international relations will be present on the 25th of October in the Church of in the Church of Council at Christ the Savior Cathedral. The Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will deliver opening remarks at the plenary session of the 24th World Russian People's Council, Orthodoxy and the World in the 21st Century. The participants will discuss topic issues of our time, such as the mission of Orthodoxy, Orthodox churches, their responses to the challenges in modern life. Traditionally, this event will be attended by state and public figures, diplomats, as well as clergymen. On November, from the 1st to the 2nd, the Moscow will host, under the auspices of the Governmental Commission for Compatriots Abroad, the World Thematic Conference of the Russian Conference. The forum will be attended by our compatriots, diplomats, prominent delegates, about 150 people from 84 countries, as well as the representatives of legislative and executive authorities of the Russian Federation, the subjects of the Russian Federation, expert and business communities. The event will include 2 plenary sessions, panel discussions, the Russian world, and exchanges of our time, Russian regions and compatriots, as well as 4 thematic sections: tourism, trends and technologies, IT technologies and small businesses, new challenges and horizons, young compatriots, a driving force of social and economic development, rights to protection, business in Russia and abroad. The event is supported by the Moscow city government. It will be covered by leading Russian regional and compatriot media, as we call them. So this event will be attended by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, but we will provide further information about it. So let's now proceed to the international agenda. We begin with the crisis in Ukraine. The NATO countries in competition pump the Kiev regime with weapons and ammunition, training soldiers, and so on and so forth, getting more close to a tipping point of a direct confrontation with Russia, according to update figures of the released information provided by the Kills Institute of World Economists. The overall military aid of the West amounted to $22.3 billion, and more than half, $23.3 billion, was provided by the US, and it has no intention to stop. On the 14th of October, they announced to allocate new tranche for Ukraine amounting to $725 million. So it is the issue of how the Baltic states, their regimes in these countries, took a lot of decisions, adopted a lot of documents providing the terrorism. But you are wrong, because all these documents that were adopted in the Baltic states, that they were signed and they were proclaimed, they should address to themselves, because they carry out extremist terrorism attacks. They kill civilians, they destroy civil infrastructure for many years, they intimidate people on the ground of their unwillingness to admit this nationalist ideology. So these countries and these regimes, they allocate a lot of money, they supply with weapons to the Kiev regime. So they are donors, sponsors, or how you call it, those who sympathize the Kiev regime. But we know that the situation is horrific. This is why NATO countries are hurrying up to blame somebody, but not to themselves. You are parties to this conflict. You are those who you're those of whom you're talking about in your declarations. You are sponsors of these terrorist actions under the auspices of the Kiev regime and with direct participation of NATO countries, both as alliance and as individual states led by the US. And the US keeping up with Ukraine, with the US colleagues. They provided $8.6 billion, and on the 17th of October, their foreign ministers adopted the EU Ministry Assistance Mission. It will be deployed in a month, and within 2 years, it should prepare more than 50,000 servicemen of different levels. $107 million will be allocated to this end. So this step goes in line with the supplies of lethal weapons to the Kiev regime, and it increases the EU involvement, making it party to the conflict. On the 12th of October, in Brussels, the 60th meeting of the contact group on Ukrainian defense in the Ramstein format took the decision to supply modern air defense systems to Kiev. According to the US military, more than 1,500 portable MLRS Stinger to be delivered to Ukraine. The overall military aid include at least 300 tanks, 130 infantry fighting vehicles, 400 armored personnel carriers, 450 armored vehicles, 700 artillery systems, including MLRS and mortars, 5,000 portable and 80,000 anti-tank rocket system, and grenade launchers, 160,000 small arms, 800,000 artillery shells, and ammunition, 90 million bullets. And after that, the regimes in the EU asked their citizens to take less shower because they do not have this opportunity to ensure comfort for them. So we know how they spend their money, and even the citizens of the EU know about it. So we can say for sure that a large proportion of these armaments has already been sent or will be sent to the black market, whose monthly smuggling turnover exceeds $1 billion. So NATO military cargo designed for Kiev ends up in the hands of terrorists, extremists, and criminal groups in the Middle East, in Central Asia, and Central Africa and Southeast Asia. So we have been talking about it since the very beginning. You do not believe us. You said that the problem was in other things, but right now it is what the international community faces. So the international community is well aware of it, as well as a lot of journalists, professional experts, international experts, and thematic structures such as Interpol, Europol have long expressed their concerns about illegal flow of weapons from Ukraine that goes including to European countries. So right now you can compare these two events, the EU withdrawal from their comfort zone with these arms flows going to the black market. This is illegal weapons. So right now you can add the problem of migrants that go to the EU countries that have been doing so for the last several years, and they are not controlled by somebody. They cannot be controlled by authorities. The government cannot even count them. If we compare all these facts, so the situation that we have on European continent is quite dangerous. So who will protect the European Union? Who will protect civilians who embrace the Brussels policy? And we see them on the screens every day. They do not inspire some hope. What they inspire is concerns. We are very concerned with their mental health. With that in mind, everyone is turning a blind eye to this fact. increasing security risks of their own citizens. The situation in Ukraine continues to deteriorate. There are gross human rights violations, discrimination, prosecutions on the ground of political sentiment, ethnicity, language, and faith. We hear that it is because of Moscow's action, but not really. As we said, it is about this plague that spreads without distinction as to logics, common sense, because it includes all the levels of the Kiev regime authorities. So this plague has long spread beyond the Russophobic policy. The last example that I would like to cite, as you know, the authorities of Mukacho in Zakarpattia dismantled the Hungarian Memorial Turul. It was set up in 2008. It is not a Soviet monument. It is nothing that could provoke some anti-Soviet ideology among the Kiev authorities. So it was back in 2008. It was established by funds of the American businessmen of Hungarian origin. It is a symbolic and it is a heraldic symbol. It is an eagle that, according to the legend, led nomadic Hungarian tribes to the territory of current Hungary. But instead of this eagle, they installed, guess what? The symbol of Ukrainian trident. So it is a barbaric logic. And they demonstrate their disregard over the interest of Hungarian national minorities. So I can use this term, national minorities, in terms of Ukrainian conflict, but still, taking into account our common history in terms of other nationalities, they commit the same crimes against other nationalities. They cannot admit the presence of any other national minority living in Ukraine. They cannot admit these minorities that have different type of ideology. So it seems that this trident should dominate, but perhaps it should destroy everything and then be on the top of everything, as right now it is on the top of this monument. It is a very symbolic sign because it is contemporary relations, contemporary times, and it was done with the approval of the Kiev regime. It is their independent sovereign decision. We can guess that something went wrong, and it will be so. It will happen with everything that that contradicts to the interest of the Kiev regime. So that is why this way Kiev has always demonstrated their regards of the interest of any national minorities, because they do not care about them, and they also took revenge on all the decisions that do not suit the Kiev elite sentiment or their ideology. So as you know, on the 17th of October, there was exchange of prisoners of war.
We're talking about civilian sailors. Since the beginning of the operation, the Kiev regime held them captive in inhumane conditions. They were banned from coming out of the vessels, and they were located in the Odessa region, and their liberation was something that Russia aspired to do, and it always raised this issue at the Red Cross, at the United Nations agencies. This was the topic of discussions in the international community. And once again, let me highlight, we're talking about civilians that were violently detained by the Kiev regime. In this regard, I would like to comment on the situation and to dwell on the NATO defense ministers meeting on the 12th and 13th of October. This meeting took place in Brussels, and it showed once again that NATO allies desire relentlessly to fuel confrontation on the European continent, and we have repeatedly stated that. They decided to provide military assistance to the Kiev regime at the meetings in a Ramstein format. They discussed plans to prepare the armed units of Ukraine to the winter campaign and increasing Kiev capacities in missile and air defense. The Ukrainian officials will receive further weapons. They're aimed at a lengthy war with Russia. This will inevitably lead to increased casualties, but that does not bother the West. Washington and Brussels continues to cover behind a hypocritical position. Allegedly, they are not party to the conflict, and the real actions of the collective West testify to the opposite thing. As NATO allies empty their weapon storages, they also ensure orders and load capacities of American military and industrial facilities. So war to some is boon to others, as we know. Who benefits the most from these developments? Of course, this relentless wing in the US domestic political establishment fueled and has been fueling the situation in Ukraine, and it doesn't serve the interests of the US nationals or the US state, but it serves the interest of corporations. At the Brussels meeting, the defense ministers agreed to build their muscle. At the eastern flank, they projected their resolve to double their presence in the Baltic and Northern Seas. And it might seem cynical, they want to do that to protect the critical infrastructure after the attacks on Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. It is a surprising thing. Virtually a year ago, President Biden and the State Department stated that it was beneficial for them to destroy this infrastructure and to do their utmost to put an end to it, and they will do anything by hook or by crook to ensure that there will be no Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. And now, 6 months after, or even 6 weeks after this subversion, they meet to say that they will protect the pipeline. Why don't you make up your mind? Any truth is better than these hiding and concealing, even though the truth is not appealing to the international community. You NATO members said that you will do anything to destroy Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, and that was stated by the US President in February. That was said by the US State Department officials officially on the camera. So who are you going to protect this pipeline from? From the United States? Then you should say that during the meeting of the NATO defense ministers, a decision was taken to protect Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 from Washington. A single word is lacking in this statement. You just need to add it up. Additional tension in these conditions is caused by NATO nuclear deterrence exercises that were launched on the 17th of October. Well, this looks very weird and odd. It's called Steadfast Noon. And let me highlight that the majority of countries that participate in this exercise enjoy non-nuclear status. The United States, in violation of the founding principles of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, has made these countries, non-nuclear countries, accustomed to the use of nuclear weapons. Allegedly, they say that they are talking about planned and regular exercises, and the leaders of the alliance try to accuse our country in reckless nuclear rhetorics. Oh, these are strong words. Such maneuvers would hardly add any stability to the current situation. Against this backdrop, loud statements regarding defensive nature of the alliance turned to be hollow words. De-escalation and strengthening security system in Europe is something that NATO does not prioritize. And it was remarkable to see the report of the, so to speak, independent Ukrainian Inquiry Commission. On the 18th of October, the independent structure was established in accordance with the anti-Russian resolution of the Human Rights Council. We do not recognize the work of this organization. Let me highlight this specifically. I would not reiterate what has been stated in this document, so to speak. I just want to say that these documents kill the very essence of the UN agencies, including the Human Rights Council. You cannot care for the right of a specific person, or specific individual, or specific people, a specific group of these people, without understanding what is going on and how many people suffer due to the fact that the West has been actively for many years fanning the flames of conflict in Ukraine, and now it is becoming a direct accomplice to the crimes of the Kiev regime. Since the establishment of the Commission, as you might remember, we had no illusions whatsoever regarding the goals and tasks of its activities. It is the propaganda structure by the West, and it was established as yet another tool to put pressure on our country, to promote their false data, to discredit the Russian armed forces, as well as to whitewash and glorify the Kiev regime. That is why we refused straight away any contact with this entity. As for the tone and tenor of this report, they confirmed our initial assessments regarding the wild political motivation behind this document and the lack of independence by this mechanism. There's no doubt that this report was drafted with the orders of its Western mentors. It has nothing to do with the reality. Experts didn't even try to make the document look unbiased and well-balanced. And they had this futile attempt to be objective. They mentioned that in some cases the armed forces of Ukraine violated the international humanitarian law, including 2 incidents that are qualified as war crimes, and end of quote. So there were just 2 crimes, and everything else was just perfect, because we're talking about the Kiev regime that is led by the US. Over $40 billion of money were transferred to Ukraine, and those countries refused to say other things. So these are just 2 separate incidents. These incidents were not quite good, but everything else is just fine. No problems whatsoever. Well, there are just some videos circulated how they kill prisoners of war, how they torture civilians. Well, it's just a young democracy we're talking about. It didn't reach the level of cynicism of mature democracy. That is why it can be justified. So these documents are also an evidence of the criminal activities by the West in violation of all possible norms and the ideal of democracy that is not confined to national borders. Let me remind you this. This democratic principle should also cover the international relations. So despite all of that, they enslaved many international structures and organizations to suit their own interests, and these goals and interests are not noble. We're talking about pure capitalization of their own resources, opportunities, and everything that has to do with that. Ensuring one's own benefit and multiplying this benefit to the utmost, to the very limit. We all know the cost of this so-called evidence and proof that are fabricated according to the well-known established Western political and media technologies. The main source of information has discredited itself. I'm talking about the UN mission, observer mission in Ukraine. It was established in 2014 as a result of bilateral arrangements between Kiev and the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Suffice it to say that the majority of its employees are the citizens of Ukraine whose political views and preferences are well known to everyone. So they become the sources of this breaking news. The same goes for their actions when they made fool of a special rapporteur of the United Nations. She made that statements that I would not like to repeat. She said something about some stimulative medication that was used by the Russian army, and this was something that was circulated broadly, and everybody understood how these sources disguide them. And the principle of work is the same. They're the platform for those who seek any opportunity to spread this misleading information. On the one hand, the collective West is doing everything to demonstrate its resolve to fight fake news, misleading information, to do the fact-checking. On the other hand, it is doing everything in order to use interstate institutions, international organizations that should allegedly prioritize professional expertise, professional work, and they do everything to use them to serve their own interests, to spread the information. The Commission pays no heed to the crimes by the Ukrainian armed units and national battalions in Donbas, the Kherson and Zaporozhye regions, including daily large-scale shellings of the settlements and civil infrastructure with the use of MLRS, high-caliber artillery, the use of cluster munition and notorious Leopard mines. That is not interesting. That has not been verified by the Commission. It has not been corroborated by any data, despite the fact that the United Nations, that the permanent representative of Russia to the United Nations and the Human Rights Council is a part of a big UN family. So despite the fact that our permanent representative showcased parts of these mines in the UN HQ, well, it looks like they didn't have time to see this footage and to take a look at these pictures. The Commission didn't even give an assessment of the tactic of living shield that is used by Ukraine and the use of artillery and firing positions at civil infrastructure facilities and other international human rights violations. As a result of these terrorist activities, on a daily basis, there are wounds among the civilians. Civilians are killed, including children and women, and this is something that is not interested for the Commission. And another glowing report previously, the so-called American diplomats carried a Pussy Riot as some monkeys all around the world. They invented some concert, bank prayers all around the globe. They sponsored them, and I thought that that was the rock bottom, but we were wrong, as we hoped that the common sense will prevail and that there is some limit to these actions by the US diplomats. Mark Fall did something curious. He is not an active diplomat, but nevertheless he's active in the foreign policy of the US. So just like he's a supporter at this neo-liberal democratic agenda, former US permanent representative to the United Nations, she brought Pussy Riot to Washington, and McFaul went even further. He organized, well, at least he did his utmost to make it happen. He supported the trip of Ukrainian fighters, Azov fighters, to the US. Is it okay to do that? We're talking about a person who is associated with diplomacy, who's teaching currently, who's advising. So he is behind the trip of Azov to the United States. We're surprised not by the fact that murderers and rapists of the Death Squadron that profess anti-Semitism and Russophobia, and 3 years ago, the US congressman called to recognize them as a terrorist organization. Now they are welcomed as guests of honor in the State Department, in Pentagon, in the Congress, and the Stanford University. And basically, the Stanford University is a place where McFaul is a professor. So we all have already seen this, but what is surprising is the blatant and outright praising of these outcasts due to one single reason, that they kill Russians. And this circumstance for the American establishment is a pardon for any crimes and justification of relentless supplies of weaponry to the Kiev regime, to Zelensky. We have already seen it time and again. In 1990s, when this, how did we call it? Could McFaul tell me that? Well, I can tell him. We called them fighters for democracy and fighters for independence of Northern Caucasus, but basically they were terrorist extremists. They were murderers. And these people were welcomed in London, in Washington, as their dearest guests. We have all seen that. They were presented with the best platforms. They were given money, political support. They were glorified. Isn't that something that happened? These were people, they had no qualms about their stories, that they were behind the terrorist attacks. But back in the day, the Americans and Anglo-Saxon political scientists and political establishment called it a fight for democracy, democratic processes, defending and championing neoliberal values. Can you imagine? That's what they call it back in the day. Dubrovka, Volgodonsk, Gurjanovo, and many other things. And those who perpetrated all this, just like right now the Azov battalion, they were praised and they were welcomed. They spread the word about them among the American citizens, justifying enormous amounts of money that they are given. And they are the ones who kill us, who kill our citizens. And first and foremost, they kill their citizens. But there is a limit to everything. Who's McFaul? We knew him from day one of his tenure in office, and it's not because of some prejudgment, prejudice, but because of his behavior here. But nevertheless, although he wasn't a part of any diplomacy whatsoever, but still he is a human, or he's not a human after all.
By the way, we were asked to comment the transfer of 6 firefighting helicopters to Ukraine. I would like to report that these actions will be in violation of the commitment to transfer such helicopters without Russia's consent. And this agreement is cannot expire. Lisbon, Russia did not give it consent, especially in view that Portugal transfers these helicopters not to fight fires. So we believe that our colleagues will take a reasonable approach and refrain from such steps. As for the human rights, and all that is that the Commission on Human Rights is concerned about in the context of the situation in Ukraine, in the framework of the Human Rights Council. Yelena Berezhnaya had her birthday. She is prominent all over the world because she defended the rights of the Russian people. So she celebrated, I believe, in prison. Maybe someone from this UN commission, maybe in some report, maybe asked, maybe said something or gathered a conference to support her. What is about with the Stanford University? Or it's another person of another formation. Maybe she has some kind of appearance, maybe nationality, maybe sex. As you remember, in March 2016, Yelena Berezhnaya was detained and took to Ukraine. When we said that we are afraid of her life, right now we still have no information about her destiny, and we believe that she is still in prison. And I would like to remind that since 2014, Yelena Berezhnaya opposes to the repressive Kiev regime the persecutions of priests and churchgoers of the canonic Ukrainian Orthodox Church. She actively participates in the fight with the glorification of the Nazi accomplices. I believe that it's not Nadezhda Savchenko. She has no defenders among the liberal society, because the liberal society, when it proclaims liberal values, the values of freedom, segregates people, the nations, for those who are with them and those who are against them, for those who are of the first sort and of the second sort, into those who do not represent the kind they want to see, who do not represent what is intended. We appealed to our human rights activists to give an assessment on the situation with Berezhnaya, and these structures have not responded yet. The OSCE, the UN. What is the OSCE? How is the Polish presidency? Do they have any desire to show interest in this person, because she dealt not with a Polish man? Do they have any conscience? This segregation of the 21st century is much more scary that was tried by the Western civilization in the 20th century. It was even scarier because we've already seen everything and made due conclusions. What is scary is not to commit some sin. It is scary to continue doing so. That's what is scary. And this cannot be pardoned. In this concern, we would like to appeal to the UN, the OSCE, and the High Commission on Human Rights, the Coordinator on the Human Rights in the United Nations, to the OSCE Bureau of Democratic Institutions concerning Yelena Berezhnaya. Just because this is a symbol of what is going on there. This is a person who hides the destinies of thousands and dozens of those whom she defended. And right now, She just represents their destiny by her own life. On our side, we continue insisting on her liberation as well as liberation of those illegally detained public figures, illegally detained in Ukraine. Now about the food security. On October 14, in Rome, in FAO, a ceremony was held dedicated to the day, to the Food Security Day. We are solidary with the FAO decision to choose the slogan of this event, "No one should be left behind." We share many assessments concerning the current situation on global security, together with the majority of those who delivered their statements. We are concerned by hunger in the world. According to UN estimates, more than 18 million people are still starving from this phenomenon, which should be which should go to the past. It is 1/7 of the whole population, according to the World Organization. We support the statements of the Director General, FAO Director General Tsui Duya, about the need to oppose the looming food crisis and to break this vicious circle and to act together to control the situation. Strong humanitarian message was sent to participants of this event by Pope Rome, who said that after these digits, huge numbers of information are the destinies, real destinies of those who are starving We actively engage, participate in activity on different platforms in the UN system in Rome and New York. And the 50th session of the Committee on World Food Security, which ended up with no results because of impeding aspiration of the collective West to once again blame Russia of creating the global food crisis and to come to an agreed and efficient international result, we have not achieved this goal. I would like to mention that our country, as a great agricultural country, contributes to the global security. So our fertilizers are very important for these aims, without which the further harvest will be under threat. So we call to restore the normal functioning of supply chains and liquidate any artificial obstructions created by the West to these processes. We are ready to deliver the food items and fertilizers and all that is needed to make food security to address food security, and we are impeded, and of course by the United States of America, who block any possibilities for financial payments for our products. So this is their destructive activity. That's what can be characterized. This is persecution of those operators who work with our country, with our companies, or mediators who work on the market and who have all rights to perform such deals, but are persecuted by the United States for various reasons. They are just being blackmailed, threatened. The activity is blocked by all possible ways. It is exactly the United States who attack the international security, doing all they can to block the possibility for one of the greatest supplier of grain to supply the products on the international market. Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. In the very first days,
when the Nord Stream explosions happened, when Western and Central Europe repeated the term that they were imposed, sabotage, without understanding the meaning of this term. So we're talking about explosions, blasts, and so on and so forth. So they disrupted the civil infrastructure that is critical for the European continent, for the EU, for their consumers, for their civilians. So in the first years, Western journalists, in the search of a Russian footprint, the Kremlin footprint, as they call it, resorted to the using data from a commercial ship tracking service, showing the location of vessels. So can you imagine what would have happened if the presence of Russian ships on the scene had been detected? So I can imagine that. I believe that even childish cartoons, even ads, and so on and so forth, would include this provocative information on the detection of Russian vessels in the area of blast, in the area where these explosions were detected, in the area where these gas pipelines were sabotaged. The best proof that Russia is guilty, according to them, would be the detection of vessels' movement. So they could take the Russian vessel, find it, and create some scary stories, and that is all. And that is all. They could draw the line and provide their evidence. So I believe that Western journalists would cover this topic. But the problem, and please, I would like to draw your attention, the problem is that Swedish journalists discovered that on the 22nd, 25th of September, in the blast area, there were some movements of vessels, but these vessels were not Russians, they were Swedish naval vessels. The Swedish Navy confirmed the information on the presence of its ships in the area and that they carried out maritime surveillance, but it wouldn't comment on the target. And do you know why? Why they did so? They said that this information is strictly confidential. So how is it possible? It was an explosion happened in the exclusive economic zone. Even NATO countries gathered together claiming that they should provide some security, and you in Stockholm still cannot say what had happened there, what your vessels did there in that area, because this information is confidential. Are you serious? So if you think that is all, you are wrong. Then the Swedish tabloid Expressen, which, by the way, has at its disposal some classified information from intelligence services. So this tabloid published a report following a visit to one of the areas of Sweden exclusive economic zone when explosions had been detected. The journalists, together with experts from the robotics company, Blair Robotics, allegedly went out to the sea with their own forces and used a deep-sea drone to take pictures and videos of the destroyed section of the Nord Stream 1 gas pipeline. So the report shows that the area is currently controlled by Swedish and neighboring Danish authorities. So sometimes there are aircraft of Swedish Coastal Guard flying over the Baltic Sea, or Swedish fighters are flying over there, or a Danish warship can be seen on the horizon, so no one can escape this control. You may say that it's a freedom of media, but still the fact is that journalists were allowed to go there 1 month after this explosion had happened, after the work of the intensive Swedish law enforcement agencies. And by the way, the Swedish authorities seriously exceeding their power over the exclusion economic zone, which breaches the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, closed off access to the blast area for more than a week, citing the need to conduct a preliminary investigation of the crime scene and of site, and a special ban was imposed on diving and the use of underwater vehicles. Currently, all restrictions on access to the area have been lifted by Swedish law enforcement and intelligence agencies, have classified the inspection materials, confiscated some physical evidence, and are not ready to share the results of the investigation even with the EU partners, let alone Russia. So I do not recognize the Swedish authorities because traditionally they are the first one who shares the information, the outcomes of the investigation. And I remember the statement made by the foreign minister of Sweden, who were the first person to knew what had happened there in the Baltic Sea, and who was the first to blame Russia. And what is going on with the foreign ministry of Sweden? Why they are not sharing these materials with those who assess these pipelines? So what did you find that you do not want to show to the whole world? Is it because of NATO influence? So did you find something that you do not want to uncover? So I believe that you have something to hide. So something that you found there shouldn't be shown or given to the whole world. So it means that the collective West is behind this blast because it was NATO warships, vessels of NATO allies that were present there just on the eve of these events. We found some NATO ammunition back in 2015 that could carry out the same blast. So you hide everything that you must share with the international community because you in Sweden, you tried to blame Russia. So Moscow's proposal of a joint investigation was denied by the Swedish government, so claiming that the investigation is the responsibility of the Swedish public prosecutor's office, which, and this is the funniest thing, which is independent in its decision-making. So what are you talking about? Right now your law enforcement agencies need time and confidentiality, and they need impartiality to take this decision. And how did they act previously with these stories about Navalny, Skripal, and so on and so forth? Did you request something to blame Russia? No, it is not. You shifted the blame. You said that Russia was guilty without any evidence. You didn't need any proofs or something like that. What you needed then was time to blame Russia, and then the Swedish government is sabotaging the constructive dialogue with the Russian side on such an important issue that is very important for European security. And why do you do so? Because you have something to hide. So what is Stockholm afraid of? Probably you believe that some of Swedish henchmen and new allies haven't had time to destroy all the evidence. So it seems that you are trying to hide important circumstances and limit the spread of information and opportunities for alternative investigations. These alternative investigations are not investigations making other conclusions. Alternative investigation means that the Russian side has the right to carry out this investigation, to participate in it according to its legal framework. So right now we turn to the situation around the JCPOA. This is the Iranian nuclear deal. So it seems that the US side has almost lost any interest to reset the JCPOA negotiation process and tries to support anti-governmental activities in Iran. The US fuels unrests there and interferes into domestic affairs of this country, and once again it demonstrates that the US is not a reliable partner fulfilling its obligation. We see it to hide its shortcomings and gaps with the Iranian negotiation process by shifting its pressure to those whom they do not like. It is not the first time when the US tries to evade the implementation of the UN Security Council Resolution 2231. They also bypass the implementation of the JCPOA. So it seems that Washington is going to violate resolution's provisions, maybe because it is more convenient for their electoral campaign or for political reasons. The international community watches it carefully and tracks it. Hardly there is any responsible country that can admit this malicious logics. It was the US that back in 2018 flagrantly violated these obligations according to the JCPOA. This plan that was adopted that was adopted and enshrined in the Security Council Resolution 2231, that is mandatory, that is obligatory to be implemented. And then there was a new American administration that proclaimed that they would like to come back to the nuclear deal, and they started a new negotiation process, but it finds out that something broke there, and one more time they neglected this topic. It is a very serious issue. It is not only a regional topic, so we call on Washington to lift as soon as possible all illegal anti-Iranian sanctions and to return to the legal framework of the JCPOA and the resolution 2231. And right now about new European sanctions against Iran. And it is a good situation. So on the 17th of October in Luxembourg, the US Council of Foreign Ministers imposed new sanctions against Iran because of human rights violation in this country. But I beg your pardon, but I understand you have lots of stuff to do, but I would like to say that if you're so concerned with human rights in Iran, so I would like to remind you that Tehran, not only one time, but repeatedly, but Tehran has never told its civilians to take less to
посмотреть, что у вас там творится. И очень сложно сейчас...
To save electricity. So I believe that Europe is facing the problem of migration and refugees, and there are people who came to your wonderful garden, Mr. Borrell said not long ago. So you were talking about these economic conditions that you have in Europe, that Europe is the best place to live. You have a wonderful garden and the rest of the world is wild jungles. But these people are going there to this wonderful garden and you violate their human rights. You do not provide the opportunity for them to enjoy their rights. So instead of thinking about human rights and violation, you should fix the situation with human rights in Europe first of all. So, but I believe that it is not only because of the violation of human rights in Iran. I believe that it is because of the JCPOA deal. So I believe that the U.S. is violating this deal one more time. So it is obvious that this step is aimed at fuel anti-Iranian sentiment in European and in Western community in general. Such signs of Iranophobia are not new because they previously occurred, and the subversive character of these discriminatory measures should be beyond any doubt. And the Russian party has repeatedly condemned the unilateral sanctions by passing the decisions of the UN Security Council. So, and right now we're talking about sanctions against Cuba, Iran, and Russia. Not long ago, the U.S. National Security Advisor, Mr. Jake Sullivan, stated that Washington is taking aggressive measures in order to support demonstrators in Iran. So the U.S. wants to suit these attitudes.
This is not what they are willing to do. This is just an order from Washington to follow the suit. Quite a nasty example, and it's quite pity that recently the European policy has been, as it seems, directed on the other things, but a lot has been done in order to preserve this deal after the illegal withdrawal of the United States from this deal and imposition of these illegal sanctions. A lot has been done by the Brussels to keep this deal afloat, and so a lot of efforts has been made in the framework of the Vienna negotiation process in order to preserve this plan. The European External Action Service cannot fail to grasp the connection between what has been done in the deal side and the currently deeply regrettable measures that severely damage all efforts to resume full implementation of the nuclear deal. And if Washington really wants to continue pressuring Iran without skillful implementation of diplomatic tools, and while seeking to acquire it illegally, it doesn't mean that the European Union should follow this nasty suit pretending to be concerned about human rights. If they think that no one is seeing this, then it's not obvious, and it no longer surprises anyone when the European Union shoots itself in the foot. It has made so many mistakes that there is no place left for it to live. No matter the European sanctions, which in themselves are acceptable, malicious, and definitely contrary to the letter and spirit of the UN Security Council Resolution 2231, we would like to warn the EU and its members against further escalation against Tehran and call for setting foreign policy priorities so that concrete actions do not contradict assurances in the interest of strengthening international peace and security. Now let's turn to something beautiful. Joe Biden signed an executive decisions supposedly aimed at strengthening the guarantees of citizens' rights in the implementation of measures of surveillance of users of electronic communication services by American intelligence agencies. What we are talking here about, in fact, it is about the introduction of a new system of transatlantic transmission of personal data of citizens of the European Union and the United States as a follow-up to the relevant agreements reached in March this year. The European Commission welcomed the signing of this document on October 10th. The next step is for the document to be approved by various EU structures, after which it will come into force if approved. From the point of view, from the point of view of European Union, this wonderful document, which provides all personal data of the European citizens to the United States, would be strictly restricted in order to ensure the national security. So, in other words, all personal data would be provided to Washington just for the benefits of the European citizens. Whenever it will be necessary for Washington, the personal data of the European citizens would be available to them. It's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful world. It's another step towards the loss by the European Union of a digital sovereignty in favor of the United States. So, behind this wonderful screen, it's even not sold to the European citizens. This new initiative is nothing more than another attempt by American administration to establish a massive and indiscriminate collection of personal data on EU citizens with the connivance of the Brussels bureaucracy. So they are pretty much concerned about some cyber threats by Russia or China. They for themselves are handing their sovereignty, digital sovereignty, to the hands of the United States. If they kept watching Chancellor Merkel while eavesdropping and something else, then we should say that this concern or shock is shared by many experts in European countries. In particular, we would like to draw the attention of Russian citizens, our citizens residing permanently in the territory of the European Union, to the need to be particularly careful in dealing with their personal data. If the EU Brussels adopts the new procedure imposed from Washington, the United States will have full access to them and will be able to use them at their own discretion. And some relevant issues regarding cyberspace, information security, and the role of the United States in all these processes involved. We noted the unacceptable working conditions for the Russian delegation in the first committee meetings in the UN General Assembly on International Information Security. So, without any explanations, no visas are granted to attend this conference. So, we have only limited composition of Russian delegation to defend our position. The background of these lowbrow actions is clear. Washington and its, how to say, allies, but in my opinions, collaborant, henchmen continue to promote the interests of Western monopolies in the UN agenda. First of all, the information and telecommunication companies, those developments and services are used to siphon off and capitalize on the intellectual resources of developing countries. The Microsofts, sadly known, this practice is copied by other countries. We know that many of them are hurt by our revelations about their unfair policies towards Internet users. We are aware, in particular, of Washington's aggressive plans to fragment the Internet as a follow-up to the April Declaration of the Future of the Internet to consolidate total control over their own citizens. This is what I just said. They look at Brussels as allies while siphoning off all the needed information. This is the level of philosophy and the quality of it. Efforts to uncover the designs and double standards of unfriendly states in the information space will continue. The information at our disposal on manipulations used for surveillance, theft, sabotage, defamation in the interest of implementing political and by and large neo-colonial designs will continue. And another topic, 7th Singapore International Cyber Week is the largest event in Southeast Asia, bringing together states in the region. Took place from 18 to 20. Russia has been a high-level participant in this format since 2018. This year, we know the traditionally warm hospitality and clear organization on the part of the hosts of the Singapore International Cyber Week. Conditions were created for bilateral meetings on the margins of this forum to familiarize forum delegations with the Russia approaches and to prevent conflicts. Many interlocutors expressed genuine interest in domestic developments to strengthen digital sovereignty. But unfortunately, the event did not avoid the fate of becoming a platform for which the U.S. administration once again tried to promote the tide agitation about unprovoked Russian aggression in Ukraine, contrary to international law. The United States, which is not shy about using information and communication, they has never been so shy, and technologies for military purposes, is indiscriminately accusing our country in hacking critical infrastructure. Now, it has been mentioned that together with Kiev regime, they keep continuing cyber attacks using information technologies for maintaining hybrid war. It's not very interesting. It's understandable why they are doing this in order to manipulate the perception and once again to demonstrate their dominance in cyberspace. Many our friends and associates in the region do not fall for propaganda tricks. They have a clear idea of our efforts at the international regional platforms, including within the framework of the ASEAN-centric mechanism to create a security architecture in the information space. They are very well aware of Russian consistent and deeply throughout line in the UN First Committee and its open-ended working group on security in the use of information ICTs in 2021-2025. We are ready to jointly address the challenges of the international information security agenda. Some more experts on 12th of October. The board of Spitsbergen Tourist Association decided to exclude from its membership the Center of Arctic Tourism Grumman, a part of the federal state unitary enterprise state trust Archipelago, the main Russian organization in this place. The Arctic Tourism Center was deprived in particular of the right to place data on its tourist products, on the information resources of the association, access to its online booking system. This situation is a continuation of a discriminatory boycott of the Russian operator by the local tourist business introduced in March this year, which resulted from the appeal of the association to all travel companies of Longyearbyen not to use the services of the Arctic Tourism Center. The management of this federal state unitary enterprise state trust Archipelago made efforts to resolve it, but the association rejected the dialogue. Such unfriendly decision of Spitsbergen Association of Tour Operators cultivates Russophobia and animosity on these islands and politicized the sphere of tourism. In addition, guests of these islands deprived of the opportunities to visit the unique Russian settlements of Barentsburg. And once again on October 17th this year, Japanese Prime Minister Kishida once again made a traditional offering of Yasukuni Shinto Shrine. As is well known, Shinto shrines in the country hold annual autumn religious festivals. The Japanese leader could have given a gift to anyone, but Kishida chose Yasukuni, a constant symbol of revanchism and shrine whose memorial list includes Japanese Class A war criminals convicted by the International Tribunal for the Far East. This again cynically ignores the feelings of the people of neighboring states. We would like to remind Tokyo of the need to fully acknowledge responsibility for the crimes of Japanese militarism, about which domestic and foreign experts once again reminded in detail during the International Scientific Practical Conference in the Diplomatic Academy of the Russian Federation on September 28. Coming back to Sweden. Another unprecedented step has been made. We are talking about the unfriendly moves towards Russia, which have been made in the wake of Western Russophobic policy. The question is about depriving the world-famous Russian conductor Valery Gergiev of the title of foreign member of the Royal Swedish Academy of Music. The decision was taken at the Academy regular meeting, and the formal reason is the unwillingness of the first-rate musician to make the political statements necessary for the collective West. What about the freedom of speech in Sweden? Unfortunately, not only the authorities of Sweden, but also cultural figures for whom talent and creativity, the same as with the freedom of speech, should always remain a priority, have taken the path of politicizing the arts. They at least should behave decently in the arts.
Let me say that it was Valery Gergiev who initiated the well-known annual Baltic Festival. Over the past 17 years, from 2003 to 2019, he was the conductor, and he took part in this festival. And by his credibility and by his excellent performance, he contributed to the increased authority of this well-known Swedish festival. Time will pass and the history will set things right. Another topic, the annual Disarmament Week will take place from the 24th to the 30th of October. The Russian Federation consistently supports and enhances the global security architecture. We have been consistently championing strengthening of international legal framework in arms control, non-proliferation and disarmament. We prioritize account for the interests of all UN member states on the basis of equal and indivisible security. Our initiatives are well known. We count on their support, including as part of the draft resolutions sponsored by Russia in the first committee of the 77th UNGA. I'm talking about non-first placement of weapons in outer space and supporting international legal arrangements in arms control, disarmament and non-proliferation. All the necessary arguments are reflected in the detailed statements by the Russian representatives in the committee, and I'm talking about a number of officials. They make regular remarks, and we will provide all the necessary links after the briefing. Yerevan hosted the Spiritual Culture Days of Russia and Armenia. There was a performance by Moscow Synodal Choir, and this was praised by many visitors. This focal event was the forum that considered the state and prospects of future cooperation. There was an arrangement reached to hold joint events to mark the 100th anniversary of the Armenian cinema and 100th anniversary of Sergei Rachmaninov, as well as the development of scientific digital projects at the level of museums. Another bright event is the Day of Spiritual Culture of Russia and Belarus. It took place on the 13th and 14th of October in Minsk. As part of this eventful program, the Russian side organized performances of choirs, workshops, and different other events. The National Historic Museum of Belarus opened the exhibition Relics of Ancient Novgorod, a light transcending the centuries. It represented icons and architecture of ancient Novgorods pure jewels of the world civilization. And another topic, Foreign Ministry provides assistance to the youth exchange. From the 14th of October, there were the Delphic Games organized in the CIS. These large-scale cultural projects help develop creative potential of young talents and achievement of new success in painting, music, choreography, and other types of art. Let me remind you that Sergei Lavrov sent his remarks to the participants, and we will provide the relevant link. This year, the Delphic Games celebrate their 20th anniversary. It coincides with the Year of Arts and Crafts and Cultural Heritage in the CIS, and they contribute to bringing the bridge between the youth of our countries. On the 22nd of October, we mark the 30th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Russia and Kazakhstan, and on this occasion, Sergei Lavrov and Deputy Prime Minister of Kazakhstan, Foreign Minister of this country, Mr. Tleuberdi, exchanged congratulatory remarks praising the development of Russia-Kazakhstan cooperation. In accordance with the plans of events marking the 30th anniversary of diplomatic relations, we conduct a number of joint campaigns to celebrate this date. Today, interaction between Russia and Kazakhstan are at the higher level. They build on solid foundation of strategic partnership, allies, and good neighborly relations. Over the past 3 decades, we created a solid legal framework. Its backbone is the Friendship, Cooperation, and Mutual Assistance Agreement, a Declaration on Eternal Friendship and Cooperation, the treaty between Russia and Kazakhstan on good neighborly relations and ally relations in the 21st century. Relations between Moscow and Astana enjoy equality, mutual benefit. Their core elements are versatile trade, economic, and investment ties, horizontal cooperation between the regions, industrial, transit, transport cooperation, coordinated steps on key international and regional platforms, including the Eurasian Economic Union, Collective Security Treaty Organization, the Commonwealth of Independent States, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Close contacts in cultural and educational areas help build better understanding between the two friendly peoples. Namely, in February this year, Nur-Sultan saw the signing of the Intergovernmental Agreement on the creation and on establishment of the branches of the two universities, and we expect that this will give additional impetus to our interaction in scientific and educational area. In September, there was the opening of the National Research Nuclear University MIFI in Alma-Ata, as well as the Gubkin Russian State University of Oil and Gas in the city of Atyval. This creates opportunities to get Russian education on very relevant disciplines in Kazakhstan for some 200 students. On the 24th of October, the world will celebrate another anniversary of the entry into force of the United Nations Charter. I believe that this is a holiday that not only marks the achievements, but also it is a good occasion to think about the state of the world, the state of the organization per se, and to think how respected the UN Charter is in the world. Indeed, this is a historic event. It laid the foundation for the work of the organization. Let me remind you, all of you who forgot, it sets the framework for the genuine multilateralism. Russia traditionally champions the central coordinating role of the United Nations in global affairs. We are convinced that 77 years on, it should remain a unique mechanism for searching collective solutions to topical problems. It should contribute to maintaining international peace and security, promotion of human rights, and gradual social and economic development. Regrettably, the collective West, headed by the US, still hopes to retain its monopoly on global decision-making. They do not cease attempts to preserve their monopoly as someone who has monopoly rights for the global decision-making. It doesn't cease the philosophy of metropoly and its attitude towards other countries as their spheres of influence. Within the infamous rules-based order, they revisit universal principles of interstate interaction as well as shaping of alternative, non-inclusive mechanisms, bypassing the international organization and certain mechanisms. One shouldn't ignore such nefarious practices as illegal unilateral coercive measures and more frequent steps to turn the UN into a platform to demonize certain countries. They opt for an independent policy that is independent from the collective West, from certain states, but at the same time this course is based on international law. And this is especially vivid in and around Ukraine, although it's not all about Ukraine. Such actions by the West contradict the United Nations Charter, but it also damages irreparably the credibility and efficiency of the UN system, and we repeatedly stated this. We deeply regret to note more frequent attempts by the West camp to subdue the United Nations Secretariat to its own interests, to privatize it by aggressively promoting of their compatriots to the leading posts. Let me note once again that the employees of the Secretariat, regardless of their nationality, citizenship, shall strictly abide by the principles of impartiality, of objectivity, as is enshrined in Article 100 of the United Nations Charter. We're convinced that in this pivotal point for the whole world, it is as important as ever to ensure strict commitment to the founding document of the United Nations, to its charter, as well as to the universal international legal rights that it underpins. A special focus should be made on the sovereign equality of states. The international communication should be based on respect for each other's opinion and concern of all parties without exception, no matter the size of the country, their resource or clout. Russia, being a member state, being a founding father of the United Nations and the P5 member state, will continue to achieve it. We will further work with all those who share the ideals that the Charter enshrines and who stands for building a just and democratic world order. A special attention is given to the work of the Group of Friends in defense of the UN Charter. Let me remind you that it was established in July 2021 and it was co-sponsored by Russia. And by way of concluding the introductory remarks, let me note that in 1972, the UNGA adopted a resolution 3038 establishing the World Development Information Day that seeks to draw the global attention to the public problems of the development and the need to strengthen international cooperation. The Assembly also decided that this date should coincide with the Day of the United Nations, the 24th of October, when competition prevails, cooperation between states, when the pandemic continues to claim human lives. It is even more important to launch universal and creative initiatives that seek to consolidate political and economic capabilities of the countries of the globe in order to improve the imbalances in financial and technological sectors, to overcome discrimination and double standards, to build genuinely just and inclusive world order. It is necessary to give a qualitative impetus to such instruments as the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. It enshrined the common vision of all states with regard to the future development of the humanity, as part of the Sustainable Development Goals. We are convinced that this document has all the necessary potential in order to galvanize extra resources, to have joint post-COVID recovery of the global economy, and to efficiently combat new threats and challenges. For our part, we are open to a partnership with all countries that respect the principles of international law and win-win cooperation. I'm ready to take your questions. Do we have International Life with us? Maria Vladimirovna, good day. You have already commented on the NATO's assistance to Ukraine. This week, EU foreign ministers agreed to establish an EU mission in assistance of Ukraine. The statement by the EU Council reports that the goal of the mission is to assist increasing military capabilities of the armed forces of Ukraine to efficiently conduct military operations, to allow Ukraine to protect its territorial integrity within its international recognized borders, to efficiently carry out its sovereignty, and defend the civilians. How would you comment on the decision by the EU Council? Indeed, on the 17th of October, Brussels declared the launch of the military training mission to train Ukrainian servicemen, and we already touched upon this today. It is reckless, it is dangerous, and it is obvious that this decision is reckless. Basically, it brings the EU to a line that we have warned them about, where they become party to the conflict, and this should be crystal clear. So by taking these decisions, the leaders of the EU states that declared their participation in this mission sign on to being a party to the military crimes of the armed forces of Ukraine and the nationalist battalions. At the same time, the Kiev regime continues to be pumped with lethal weapons, and we already talked about this today. The same day, the EU foreign ministers agreed to allocate extra 500 million euros at the level of European Peace Facility. This is cynical to the limit, to purchase weapons, military equipment, and uniform to Ukraine. Using this facility, peace facility, the armed forces of Ukraine continue to kill civilians, destroy houses, hospitals, kindergartens, schools. They strike critical infrastructure, including Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. And due to these actions, these weapons are smuggled in the black market, and we talked about this already. After it is got in the black market, it is smuggled to not only hotbeds in the world, but also it returns to the EU, to the hands of organized criminals, extremists, and terrorists. Instead of achieving peaceful settlement of the crisis and strengthening security, Brussels invested over 3 billion euros to support the military solution to the Ukrainian conflict, and they, for many years, formed this conflict by involving in the coup d'etats and shaping the Ukrainian democracy using their own patterns. So the leaders of the EU strengthen the Kiev government's perception that they can win in this conflict on the battlefield. They invest unparalleled funds to drag on with the armed standoff in order to further damage the interests of Russia, to inflict damage to the well-being of our citizens, but while doing so, they also do harm to their own citizens. So the ongoing protests in the European capitals show that there is growing miscontent among rank-and-file Europeans. Not all of them are guided by lofty ideals. Not all of them are taking to the streets to support peace. The thing is that they are not ready to perceive and to share the commitments of their regimes regarding the fact that they are supporting Ukraine, they are supporting these activities. The EU citizens don't believe it is a necessity, even without any substantial political conclusions. They just simply do not want to participate in it, but they have no other option because they were never asked. If we build on this wild reference by Borrell, I'm talking about the European garden, it looks like in the European garden, the hogweeds gain the upper hand and they threaten with their nefarious influence not only the ecosystem of neighbors, but they also put at risk the future of civilized fauna back at home. I believe that Joseph Borrell put his name in the history of diplomatic relations with golden letters as he made this statement. That's what he would be remembered for. Do you have any other questions? Yes. This week, Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Arms Control, Mallory Stewart, stated that the United States is ready to resume negotiations with Russia on an agreement. I'm talking about the New START treaty. However, the parties, according to her, should have good faith in these negotiations. How does it stick to reality? You know, there's nothing new in this statement. The same statements were made by other American officials, including President Biden. Such claims are not corroborated by some specific business requests via working channels. It is all in the information field, and they do it solely in the form of megaphone diplomacy, and as we see it, it has only propaganda goals. At the same time, Russia is demanded to show its readiness in the spirit of goodwill to resume interaction with the US. So we're just talking about PR campaigns. So in principle terms, we remain open for a dialogue on de-escalation, supporting strategic stability and risk reduction measures, including the use of arms control instruments, but it is possible only on the basis of equality and respect for the interests of our country. And if I may, another question. How would you comment on another outburst of the spy mania in the Netherlands? Well, I can characterize it as an outburst of spy mania in the Netherlands. It is an attempt of a certain group of political establishment of this country, of the collective West, to spoil bilateral relations with Russia. This is a well-tested tool of the Rutte government in various forms. They don't have enough imagination to invent something else. There were a lot of audacious, ludicrous statements by this government since 2014, and the latest report was made in the Dutch media, and this was made together with the Belgian media, and clearly with the participation of officials of the two countries. The journalists had the audacity to publish personal data of Russian diplomats and members of their families. Besides Russophobia and this spy mania, we're also talking about simple basic neglect for the human morale, let alone pillars of diplomatic communication and journalist ethics. We regret that the publications of such kind fit in the general political course of the Dutch authorities of the Russophobic spirit. It is clear to us that the kingdom tries to be at the forefront of Russophobic forces in Europe, and we also see here an attempt to distract the attention from the real problems in the country and to put the blame on all the present and future problems on the Russian spies. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
МИА Россия сегодня.
MIA Russia Today. Good afternoon. We have the following issue. On October 18th, during the briefing, the Domplet said that nothing in Russia's actions indicates a desire to negotiate in good faith. I beg your pardon, what negotiations? So this is a quote. So what negotiations? We are negotiating not in good faith. So we have the question, how can you comment on such a statement? If you are talking about are we negotiations not in good faith, it is needed to clarify which negotiations. And to so they need to identify the elements of dialogue. So if we do not maintain dialogue in the way it should be, so someone during the briefing referred to the joint Iranian nuclear deal. And the implementation in good faith by the United States. From the very beginning, since the year 2000, Bolton said that Iran should be bombed, should be attacked. Then they added that should act by force. Then they started negotiating. Then they started to participate in this deal. And then themselves withdrew without any procedural measures. They said that they do not know anything about this, and then they came back to this deal. And then when negotiations were formed on the basis of equal rights between participants, so they started to interfere in the domestic affairs of Iran to push forward their decisions this way. So I'm talking about the United States. And after that, they complain about someone's ability to negotiate. We have a lot of examples. For example, for climate. So they have a dialogue or they refuse to participate in this dialogue. So what negotiations are you talking about? On the situation in Ukraine, I would like to remind that back then they flagrantly violated their commitment not to expand NATO. They denied Russia's security concerns. Now the United States are blackmailing the Asian, Latin America, and the Middle East countries by making them join illegitimate sanctions against Russia. So that's how they lead their negotiations, maintain negotiations. They don't have even moral right to profess morality to us, because all their methods, they are known. Double standards, lies, hypocrisy, and as well as manipulations. Everybody knows inability to negotiate in the context of the Kiev regime. Its inability to negotiate and to implement the achieved agreements became obvious to everyone. I would like to recall in brief, the Kiev regime was created by the United States by anti-constitutional coup d'etat in 2014. The opposition bloc dismantled the agreement with the legitimate authorities. As you remember, there were negotiations at the beginning of 2014 between the government authorities. It was Yanukovych and the opposition with Yatsenyuk. Everything was destroyed. Then they concluded through negotiations the Minsk agreements. And throughout 8 years, the Kiev leaders, in violation of these Minsk agreements, bombed Donbass and sabotaged negotiations to implement the Minsk agreements. Right now, they recognized they did not even intend to implement these agreements. After the beginning of the special military operation, the Kiev regime initiated another negotiations, but in a month they disrupted it, following the order by Washington. So are there any doubts on their ability to negotiate? Russia, throughout 8 years, has been a mediator between Minsk and Donbass. We responded positively to participate on the neutrality status of Ukraine, and Kiev just disrupted such negotiations. We were open, we were always open for these negotiations. You will never find, never, that we refused to anyone in negotiations, even even taking into account unreasonable reactions of other international community, all these pretexts, and all with these references, we always responded, gave a positive response. But today, the Ukrainian authorities fixed, as they said, said that these negotiations won't be possible, and this was an official decree by Zelensky. You've heard about this. And that's why Washington is pumping Ukraine with weapons by spending billions of dollars and leading to a bloodshed, not with desire to use diplomacy as a kind of ideal solution. So it's not Washington who should teach us how to conduct negotiations and not to question any ability to negotiate by anyone. So that's why it's not Russia, but the United States, the Kiev regime, must demonstrate their ability and readiness for negotiations in good faith and for the implementation of their agreements. As for the United States, they should demonstrate this willingness at other platforms. So right now, I don't see any readiness or eagerness from the United States for these negotiations. So I bring back to Karen Donfriend her own words. So if that's it, so we'll proceed further. CGTN channel. Good afternoon. We have already sent a question about the military exercises by NATO. NATO says that in relation to the current circumstances, with the current events, that these exercises are not related to the current situation. So how does Moscow assesses these exercises? So first of all, we appreciated the title. The title is very interesting because it opens a road, it opens huge opportunities for our imagination. So it's a great title. And I think we can declare a kind of a competition for the title of the next NATO exercises. As for your question, regardless of whether the NATO exercises mentioned in the question are linked by their organizers to current events or not, we continue to see them as a stabilizing component linked to the very essence of the NATO practice of the so-called joint nuclear missions. We have consistently pointed out that the involvement of aircraft and military personnel from non-nuclear countries, as I've mentioned before today, of the North Atlantic Bloc in the training of the use of the United States nuclear weapons deployed in Europe contradicts the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and poses obvious risks to the security of Russia. So this practice must be ceased. All nuclear weapons must be returned to their national territory and the relevant infrastructure must be destroyed. So in the context, there is no reason for the Western media to speculate about Russia conducting similar exercises. No, we do not conduct such exercises. All our nuclear weapons are located exclusively within the national territory, and non-strategic nuclear weapons are stored exclusively in a non-deployed state in centralized warehouses. As for the training of Russian strategic deterrents, they are conducted on a regular basis and are of a planned nature. Do you have any other questions? Yes, I have another two questions. China is hosting the 20th Congress of the Communist Party these days. Xi Jinping's mentioned development 108 times. So what is your assessment of Xi Jinping's visions of development for the world? So we we monitor the situation. During which they will identify the policy for the future years. We are glad that China reached effective results. They strengthen economic, political cooperation. We also strengthen coordination in the international arena. So this is to be brief. I also answered in detail to these questions to the newspaper Argument in Fakte, and I will give you a reference. And another question. The New York Times and Siena College conducted a survey in which the high number of respondents ranked the economy as the most important problem for the US. Inflation and the rising cost of living were second most popular. According to Bloomberg analysts, the US economy will inevitably face a recession within a year. What do you think a recession in the US has to do with it? I think that it's not a question the Minister of Foreign Affairs should deal with. It's a question, it's up to the United States. I believe they will say that they have no recession. In general, I can say that it's not just an economic crisis. This is a systemic crisis endured by us, which the United States start to endure. As for the statistics, it's unsatisfactory for the United States. The current administration, they are already in this recession. So I'm talking about a huge debt, $31 trillion, inflation rate by 8%, the fall of the GDP by 0.9 in the half part of the year. And they also printed unbacked money, which triggers all these processes. And all these indicators, they are given against the backdrop that they have a printing machine of the world currencies. So how can they do that, having such resources? How can they fall into recession? All that is happening, we can speak a lot, we can talk a lot about what is happening now. I'm not a specialist in economy. Of course, we should name another reasons, but the main reason is that pumping of the US economy with trillions of unbacked dollars, and that's the logical result of the liberal globalism.
Is Yahoo News present? Good morning. Yes, we're present. You have just said that the US in a systematic recession. Could you explain what are you talking about? So we explain it that the systematic the crisis is not a recession because of calamities such as pandemic. The economic crisis may be provoked by pandemic. It may be provoked by some temporal difficulties or temporary obstructions in economy. For example, in 2009, if I am right, so it was because of the collapse on the share markets. But this systematic crisis is a complex of problems that are indicators of systematic problems, both in economy, in internal and external policy, a lot of indicators in different spheres that depict crisis signs. So yes, it is a crisis of liberal ideology, so I would like to say it like that. So, and we can see this agenda in the US, and it is broken. So this model that is in the basis of the US economy is not liberal at all. So it is not liberal. So please look at today's Biden's statements calling on the companies, calling on oil companies to act in a proper way. So what do you think about it? I didn't hear that America is a party to the war. So I didn't hear that they use these liberal and economic values, the liberal system of command, to the military purposes and so on and so forth. But right now, the president of this country, I do not know in which capacity, he proclaims some bills without any explanations. So it is not explained by some circumstances, but he made this speech. He was talking with his economic experts, and of course it is a systematic disruption. So we have heard a lot about freedom of supply and demand and so on and so forth, but we don't see it right now. What about sanctions control? What about sanction control? So it kills the very idea of liberalism in the economy. So the necessity to recruit more world crisis in order to fuel itself by political or economic resources, the total control over energy markets. So please look what is going on the market. It is price ceilings, control over resources that do not belong to them, pushing their economic operators. It is a systemic crisis indeed. So their liberal model is not can be not characterized by competitive advantages and so on and so forth. It can operate only by force measures. So let alone internal political situation. I believe that you know it better than me. They use repressive machine from legislative authorities to the law enforcement agencies. They control the media in general that belongs to some individuals. They control the media coverage and so on and so forth. So it is speaking in general terms. Thank you. And I have another question. So you may ask me how many questions you would like. So I would like to ask you about the relations between Russia and Israel. So in a particular area, no, in the area of special military operation in Ukraine. So I cannot say you something unusual about our relations with Israel. We were talking about the fact that it is unacceptable for us to admit the neo-Nazi regime in Ukraine. We do not understand how Israel can declare some values of non-acceptance of neo-Nazi regime and the principle of collaboration of Nazism and fascism. So their stance was unacceptable, was inadmissible for us, but our position, I mean the Russian position, is clear and it has been provided clearly, but in other terms, I mean in other areas, some economic or political areas, we develop our relations. So if you are interested in this topic, I will provide you with further information. So I would like to understand whether you think that Israel is taking part in this conflict. So politically, they stressed that they support the Kiev regime. For us, it is inappropriate because we have our own stance and they are well aware of our point of view. So I would like to understand whether you are ready to communicate with Washington. Are you ready to negotiate with Washington or exchange some opinions and so on and so forth? So we have never refused the negotiation process with Washington. We have never refused any contact with Washington. So there was no necessity to breach our context with them. But there's those who block everything. They withdraw from the treaties. They breach all the obligations assumed. So I believe that we have never had any problems to realize our context. But if the other party blocks all the contacts, how we can maintain them with a country that isolated Russia? Thank you. Right now, we proceed to Reuters. Is it present? Yes, we are here. Good afternoon. Not long ago, the day after yesterday, a French newspaper published an article about the former Russian diplomat Boris Bondarev. In this article, Bondarev claims that Russian diplomacy has established Soviet-type propaganda. In particular, Bondarev writes that the Russian diplomacy is fraught with Soviet-type propaganda. In particular, Bondarev writes that diplomats report their successes in Moscow or in the Kremlin. They express not real state of affairs, but this perfect situation. So I would like you to comment on the article of this former diplomat and how much of what is published is true. So I would like to say that it is not a good newspaper. So I encourage you to study journalism if you are interested in that. And I would like to ask you a question about Foreign Minister's work schedule. Not long ago, Mr. Lavrov is scheduled to visit one of the countries in the Middle East. So I would like to figure out which country it will be. So very soon we have some plans to conduct a foreign visit, and we will provide further information on these visits, on the formal visits, but we will provide this information later once we figure out all the information. Do we have Moscow Post with us? Yes, we're present. We have a couple of questions. In September, the trade and investment ministers of the G20 failed to agree on a joint statement. The meeting of the heads of diplomatic missions in July was so difficult. How do you assess the G20's ability to positively influence on the global economy? So we believe that the G20 is a key global economic forum. We would like to remind you, and it's very interesting information, whether Yahoo News correspondent is still here with us, because he asked us about the systematic crisis. So whether the G20 has something to do with this global economic crisis. But still, we would like to say that this initiative emerged as a response to the financial crisis of 2008. So the international organizations are formed in order to respond to some economic problems. So this global economic forum as well was created in order to overcome some problems and some obstacles. Then the US, because of the US, we faced this global financial crisis, and a lot of medium and small business enterprises went bankrupt. There were a lot of destroyed lives, both in the US and abroad, and the G20 countries got united in order to overcome this crisis. So we are convinced that the development of this association, in which both developed and developing countries are equally represented, can give impetus to the construction of a fair and inclusive world economic system with multiple pillars. At the same time, the Western countries are trying to politicize the G20, the G20 association, and it has a very negative effect on the forum's performance. They have the G20 association where they can preach this ideology, but by no decision making, only spreading this defamation and so on and so forth. But the G20 association is functioning for other purposes. So all draft ministerial statements, regardless of their specialization, throw in deep anti-Russian provisions on Ukraine. So challenges in any sphere are written off as aggravation of the situation in the country without taking into account the real preconditions. So such provocative steps lead to the disruption of agreements that have almost been reached. So it seems that the goal of the collective West is one, to smear and discredit Russia using any means appropriate, and to
из числа государств БРИКС.
Not only we, but also the members of BRICS Plus stated dissatisfaction with the line of escalation and are calling for a diplomatic solution to the situation around Ukraine. Many delegations have already called for a focus on depoliticized collective efforts in agreed areas of cooperation rather than a trial that will knowingly lead to a split of the G20. Regrettably, the G7 and its henchmen have let such appeals go unheeded, paralyzing the G20's activities. Once again, they have G7. If you are willing to invite your satellites in order to join the choir, then go ahead, but don't provide any obstacles. At the same time, we know the balanced and unbiased course of the Indonesian presidency of the G20, which, despite increasing tensions, plays the role of the honest broker on this international platform. We highly appreciate the principled position of Jakarta, and hope that the forthcoming G20 summit in the Bali on November 15-16 will take a tangible contribution to resolving current global social economic problems. For our part, we continue to work actively with that. Second question. Mr. Gavrilov, head of the Russian delegation at the Vienna talks, called the NATO nuclear exercises taking place in Europe a violation of a comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty. Earlier, he also mentioned that Western countries' support of a Kiev regime is equal to actual participation of the conflict. Minsk said that NATO Iron Wolf exercises might become the basis of the creation of the strike groups on the borders of the Russian Federation and Belarus. What does the Vienna document 2011 look like in this condition, and what can we expect in the area? Arms control. It's a wonderful mention in Iron Wolf or a fluffy turtle, Nile and crocodile. I just wonder who is going to invent these kind of names. They are either funny or aggressive. What's maybe something in between for the sake of peace, security around the world. This is just a sort of wild claims. Once again, let's come again to this topic. The fact that NATO held these exercises. This is with something about noon, or a steadfast noon. Also cannot but cause concerns. Russia has repeatedly pointed to the fact that American nuclear weapons are on the territory of non-nuclear alliance member countries, and that these countries are involved in practical scenarios for their use. That runs in conflict to the provisions of NPTs. United States nuclear weapons deployed in Europe, which are capable of reaching Russian territory and striking strategic facilities, pose a direct and constant threat to us. This is a gross violation of the letter and spirit of the NPT, hampering disarmament efforts. This is exactly these violations and irresponsible actions on the part of NATO that head of Russian delegation of Vienna on military security and arms control, Konstantin Gavrilov, spoke of. As I said, all Russian non-nuclear, non-strategic nuclear weapons, the number of which has been reduced to 4 times the level that our country had in 1991, have been transferred to non-deployed category and concentrated in central storage bases within national territories. As for the direct support of the Kiev regime by Western countries, they make no secret of that. In this case, they are proud of that. In this case, the direct objective is to prolong hostilities as much as possible and to continue the attempts to weaken our country. And of course, it also tells on the situation in arms controls. Obviously, this current deep crisis can only be overcome only when Western elites understand that security, specifically on our continent, without the involvement of Russia and its allies is impossible. And the last question. There is a lot of information today about demonstrations and protests or rallies in Europe over prices, energy resources. What do your embassies say? What is your impression about what is happening there abroad? About what? About what is happening there. I believe everything is quite obvious. You can see it for yourself. So far you have the possibility to see what is happening in the wonderful gardens of the European Union. Before they block the broadcasting, the leaders of the European Commission say that the current high level of social well-being in the European countries, they directly are saying about this, are largely based on the cheap energy resources from Russia. So the main gardener of the European Union, Mr. Borrell, mentioned about this. In the current circumstances, when supplies from Russia have significantly decreased or shrink due to the Western actions, the consequences of this short-sighted sanctions policy and based approaches to the situation in Ukraine have been keenly felt by ordinary citizens of Europe. Many beyond the politics sympathized Russia, and now they feel, everyone feels these protest demonstrations in a number of countries are a natural response to the decline of living standards. I'm not trying to provide some legal status to this, but this is a justified response because they feel some decline in living standards and threats to their economic situation of evolution or development, and this is the result of the anti-Russian political course of European elite. They are aware of the fact that now what they face now is not the result of objective reasons. This is what they did with their own hands by bureaucracy, European bureaucracy, thirdly by the leadership of the US or pro-American people who stand for the American interest in Europe. And the fourth argument, the main reason, the main trigger is the Russophobic threshold, which should be aimed at the American interest in Europe. So this wild poisonous cocktail has been offered to European leaders as medicine to European leaders, but it has turned out that it's a poison. And what should be done to rectify the situation? I don't know. We just have been warning for many instances, like European leaders are saying that now they are going to defeat Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2. But from whom? This is their territory, their security, safety, and their military alliances dominating around the world, not only in the member states. Who are they going to protect these pipelines from, or their underwater submarine miners? I just wonder who they are going to protect from these pipelines. Moreover, Russia has initiated these gas pipeline projects going to Europe, and the construction of these two pipelines, and Russia has done its best to realize these projects. For many instances, I was asked whether we were going to succeed in construction of these projects, and we did our best, just in the contrast to what we were aimed at and by whom. But the European Union just failed to perform its own role under the pressure of the United States, and under the pretext of the anti-Russian policy. But in fact, it turned out that this is going just to violate the natural interest of their citizens. So much depends on the social and political situation in these countries. This is not what I wanted to comment on. This is just up to them. So newsroom, are you here? Yes. News.ru. The first question deals with, partially you just commented on the Turkish President Erdogan offered Russian leader Mr. Putin to extend the grain deal. To do so, the Turkish authorities asked Washington for guarantees on the entry of Russian agricultural products into the markets, and reportedly received a positive response. Will Moscow agree to extend this agreement? Probably today, I hope, that our experts would provide some detailed comments on that. I wouldn't like to provide my personal view on that in parallel. Okay, thank you very much. So the head of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Lavrov, during the talks with the Armenian counterpart, Alexander Mirzayan, said that CSTO is ready to send its observers to Armenia. In Yerevan, he said he was ready to accept it. Meanwhile, the EU civilian mission has already been deployed to Armenia this week, And does the CSTO plan to deploy its forces to the territory of the Republic, and at what stage are the negotiations over this issue now? Now we are working on the issue currently on the holding of extraordinary session of a Collective Security Council of Collective Security Treaty Organization. It is supposed that during the upcoming session of the leaders in the format of video conference, the results of the CSTO mission in the Republic of Armenia will be examined, and they will examine the proposals on joint measures to assist Yerevan, including the draft decision of the CSTO Collective Security Council on joint measures on rendering assistance to Armenia. So I think additional information will be available on the official resources of the Russian Federation and on the CSTO Secretariat. We will share all possible and available information with you. Just to clarify, what kind of specific assistance are you talking about? They are out to address this issue. This is a treaty which deals with a collective assistance, so everything should be agreed and discussed at this level. And the last question. So there is no point of maintaining diplomatic relations. They can hardly be regarded as human. Can we expect some changes in the work of diplomatic missions in other countries? And if so, then what of the nature? So for last 2 days we have been talking about this. Should we expect or not? And Minister Lavrov just stated a real fact.
These formats were modified not by us, but the collective West. These are unfriendly states who are expelling diplomats in large scale, who are seeking spies, enemies among diplomats, who are not issuing visas. They even go as far as link the political preferences and political ideas of diplomats with the possibility to extend their visas and accreditation and so on and so forth. We have always assumed that diplomats should serve to build bridges, or at least to try to find a solution to problematic issues, to have contacts, to avoid different standoffs. But the collective West drew another conclusion. I do not know what they were guided by. I could only guess that it was made at the behest of the United States to avoid contacts between the EU and the Russian Federation, including on the diplomatic track, to sever our relations in many sectors. For many years, we had normal integrational work, economic rapprochement, diplomatic efforts, humanitarian ties, sometimes political contacts. So in the interest of Washington, they wanted to destroy this, including on the political track. So it's a matter of fact. We just state that this was made by the unfriendly steps, and knocking on the closed door that they closed or somebody else closed for them is something that we do not see any point in. But there are loads of other regions and other tracks where we have been waited for a long time, and we were even reproached that we didn't use all of the opportunities. So we will work in areas where it will be mutually beneficial for us and our partners, and we will implement our national priorities. Thanks a lot. You're welcome. As for the conclusion that the West is not a credible partner, we have drawn this conclusion. Let's move on. Do we have Anadolu with us? Hello, good day. Madam Zakharova, recently the U.S. State Department representative has said that Washington supports the intention of Paris, Berlin, and London in the following: if Iran supplies UAVs to Russia, then it will violate the Iranian nuclear deal. Could you please comment on this statement? We have already commented. Everything that has to do with the Iranian file has one single goal: to put pressure on this country by Washington. And to this end, Washington mobilizes NATO allies and EU countries to support its position. Clearly, it is a pressure on Tehran, and it will be exerted on a number of tracks, as we see today: interference into domestic affairs of Iran, meddling with the Iranian leadership, creating far-fetched reasons, and they will do their utmost. They have been doing it for quite some time. They have been trying to blame Iran on possible violations of the UNSC Resolution 2231. Not so long ago, Deputy Spokesperson of the U.S. State Department made another statement in this regard. He tried to capitalize on the popular topic in the American media. I'm talking about supplies of drones to Russia by Iran. The thing is that the most difficult part is to prove an axiom, because an axiom is something that does not require any proof. But we have to do it constantly. Who violates the UNSC Resolution 2231? It is the United States. They withdrew from the deal. Back in 2018, they said that they will no longer implement it. Basically, judging by their logic, they had to sanction themselves because they violate this Security Council Resolution 2231. But for some reason, they failed to do that. Now, it is absurd, it is wild, and it is illogical what they're trying to do. They try to find ways to blame somebody else for the fact that they are doing themselves. It's not the first time that the Americans try to present their own mistakes as others' mistakes and to present their speculations as real facts. We faced this time and again during the Trump administration, and the same goes for the Biden team. At closer look, they pursue the same policy to undermine the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action and the UNSC Resolution 2231. They do not want to get back to the deal. They didn't want to revive this deal. So in this case, why didn't they want to have all this fuss? If you withdrew from the deal, if Trump did that, then you had to silently follow up on that. Either the Biden team didn't want to support what Trump did because they had strong feelings about that, or they just wanted to look as if they were trying to get back to the deal. And after that, due to some political reasons, they wanted to try scapegoats for the fact that they cannot return to the deal. The statements by the U.S. State Department that flagrantly violate the reality, distort the reality, show that the moment of political enlightenment, when the U.S. administration got involved in negotiations in the Vienna format, gave way to some habitual policy to put most pressure against Iran. So when they fail to implement Plan A, they go to Plan B, and they exert pressure and do everything that is illegal. The same goes for the statement of the U.S. Special Representative on Iran, Robert Malley. He recently stated that the issue of the U.S. returning to the JCPOA is something that is not on the agenda as of now. So how can we understand whether Washington has something on the agenda or has nothing at all. We note the speed with which Washington and European capitals that echo it jumped on the protests in Iran, and they tried to impose new restrictions against Iran using this pretext. And they didn't care for the outcome for negotiations on the JCPOA. We are convinced that the flagrant violation by the Western countries, above all the United States, cannot be justified in any way. It is the US who decided to deal a blow on the UNSC Resolution 2231, abandoning its commitments and launching impediments for this resolution and for the implementation of this resolution by other countries. The truth cannot be concealed by any statements and accusations against Iran, Russia, or any other state, because all states understand what is going on. As you know, the US, despite the UNSC resolution, preserved unilateral embargo on military and technical cooperation between Iran and other countries. They try to impose their approaches globally, and it has been made illegitimately. The Russian side has repeatedly condemned this policy. We will continue seeking commitment to all resolutions of the UNSC, namely the UNSC Resolution 2231. As for the rumors regarding the Iranian drones, they are circulated by some anonymous sources. This gossip was denounced lately by both Iranian and Russian representatives. There is no need to comment on the claims against Tehran and against Russia. I believe that these are just a number of speculations that are not corroborated and far-fetched assumptions that the UK and France try to build into some kind of a construct. We just need to answer a simple question, whether the UNSC Resolution 2231 is alive or not. If it is alive and kicking, then the US should implement it. Currently, a country that has not been implementing it, that has been flagrantly violating it, is the United States. That is why all the claims should be directed at Washington. As for the drones, it has nothing to do with that whatsoever. What does it have to do with that? The commitment of the US is to abide by the United Nations Security Council resolution. As for the moral obligation of the Washington, it does have its obligation because it voted in favor of this resolution. They did it, and they were sponsors of this deal. Now they stopped implementing it, and now they have some accusations against others for allegedly not implementing this resolution. That's what I'm talking about. It's virtually impossible to prove an axiom, because an axiom is something that does not require any proof. We also saw the discussions in the UN Security Council. They were quite telling. Everybody spoke unequivocally. The US and those who are behind them were refuted. The topic of large-scale pumping of weaponry into Ukraine, including heavy and long-range systems, were covered, and these supplies are ongoing for more than 1 month, despite the demands of the international law and national regulation of the exporting countries. This just has no common sense. As for Lugansk, Donetsk, human rights there are something that anybody else doesn't care at all. At the same time, human rights in Washington is something that should be a priority. Iran should not supply anything to anyone, but the US can do it, although it leads to many casualties. It's an open secret that parts of this weaponry fled to black markets, including the ones in Europe, and the more the better, as they continue prolonging the agony of the Zelensky regime. The suppliers have no qualms about inflicting the maximum damage to Ukraine and to its people. Do have the Media Alliance of Russian Communities. Good day, Madam Zakharova. First of all, thank you for this bright presentation of the news that you gave us today. It makes us really happy. Today, you said that Russian compatriots should be extremely cautious about their personal data. Thanks a lot. I have another question. Despite the challenges in air communication with the EU, there are still needs to provide for this communication. At times, we're talking about difficult air routes. They have to cross several borders. And are there any risks that our citizens could be detained, for instance, for their publications in social networks and blogs? Do you advise them to limit these trips or to restrict them? Or do you have any additional useful recommendations for Russian citizens to protect their rights abroad? What kind of countries are you talking about? I'm talking about the EU.
Я хотела что
So I would like to remind you that right now the entrance for touristic purposes to certain European countries is prohibited by the decision of the authorities of these countries. So you should address this question to these authorities, including the Baltic states such as Poland, Finland and the Czech Republic since the 25th of October. When it comes to the permissible grounds for crossing the external borders of the European Commission, then the border and customs services of these countries are making unreasonable and provocative demands on Russian citizens, including forcing them to sign documents condemning the actions of the Russian authorities or conducting additional checks, including the possibility of confiscation of cash from our compatriots, or they ask some crazy questions. So they do a lot of things, and we condemn the discriminatory policy of these countries, which external border services act like that, including the Baltic states, Poland, Finland, and the Czech Republic, and as well as far as the internal EU borders. According to the information at our disposal, they are crossed by Russians as before on the same grounds as you are citizens, and under these circumstances, the Russian foreign minister strongly recommends that Russian citizens intended to travel to the European countries should study the current rules of entry into the territory and to assess it in terms of possible risks, including the possible refusal of entry and the potential revocation of a valid visa, and a lot of provocations that we know, including the confiscation of assets, of cash money. So one more time, I do not want to recall all these things because it is very embarrassing for the EU that contradicts everything it has been preaching for many years, everything that was its value. So it is also worth mentioning that Russian diplomats do not have the authority to assist Russians in crossing foreign borders or in resolving disputes that arise in this regard, because we do not have representatives on the borders from the Russian foreign ministry. And our embassies, they are empty because our diplomats were expelled. So it also is true about Russian consulates. Also, as a general recommendation, we would like to remind you that in order to protect their legal interests abroad, Russian citizens have the possibility to contact lawyers and law companies who have indicated their willingness to provide appropriate legal support, and we will provide further information on the ministry's website. Thank you for your attention. If we do not have Maria Vladimirovna, excuse me, we have one more question. The new Swedish authorities cancelled the concept of its foreign policy. Excuse me, can you repeat it? So it refused its feminine foreign policy. Yes, this country used to have this concept. So the government believed that this policy is nonsense because it does not have some sense. So you, as a female diplomat, do you believe that it is necessary to introduce such a policy in Russia? So I do not know even where I can find some power to answer this question. So you see, on the one hand, it is very funny because the collective West refuses everything that they has previously imposed to other countries, as well as the Swedish foreign minister who came to Russia. She discussed all these issues since this point of view, since that political issues have nothing to do with gender policy. And I remember such a dialogue. Then she tried to impose this gender moment in diplomacy and international affairs. So it is nonsense, but trying to say that a diplomat, an expert of international experts, should be a good expert, a specialist, and a good person with high morality standards. So no matter which gender he or she is, so this issue should be resolved at another level. So what we appreciate is professional standards and values, and the rest is due to circumstances, so on and so forth. So this is my stance that I have repeatedly made, and right now they
Какой сусе? Вот с
right now they say that it is an item of their policy that is very important, but most thing that the collective West as well as Sweden impose to the rest of the world as well as obligatory values. So they are those who impose these items. Sometimes behind these labels there are quite the opposite concept, and it is more dangerous. So thank you a lot for your attention. See you next time. I wish you good luck.